Hey guys, welcome back to our beginning fly tire series that we're doing for the Riversage Journal. This is our third installation. Hope you guys are enjoying watching these as much as we are enjoying bringing them to you. Um, Last month we did the green weenie, which if you can remember, I said it's a staple or should be a staple in every trout fisherman's fly box, and we absolutely believe that. This week we're going to do another staple, not just that should be in your trout box, but could be in your smallmouth box, could be in your saltwater box as well, and it's called the woolly bugger. The woolly bugger is an impressionistic pattern. Originally, it was designed to be a leech pattern, but you can change the size, the color. You can tie it in white, and it can represent a minnow. You can tie it in olive and black, and it can represent a leech. We've caught all the trout species. We've caught smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, chain pickerel. Honestly, just about anything that swims will eat a bugger. So we're going to start. This one is going to be I guess, a standard bugger or an unweighted style bugger. We're going to tie this just on the hook. You can do it with a bead or a cone, and you will see that's very popular. You can also lay a base of lead on the shank of the hook before you tie. But for what we're going to do today, this is just going to be the standard woolly bugger. So we'll go ahead and switch cameras and we'll get started. Okay, so you can see I've got my hook in the vise. This is, we're tying today. It's a Mustad Signature 79-580. This is a size 8. It is a 2X heavy 5XL. So if you remember what we talked about last time, 2X heavy means the wire size or the diameter or thickness of the wire is 2 times the standard. And the 5XL means that the shank of the hook is 5 times longer than the standard hook shank. Generally, you will find on your bugger patterns that you're typically tying on like a 4 or a 5XL shank hook. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay some thread down. I'm going to tie on about 1 hook eye diameter back from the eye of the hook, and I will lay this thread base on conventionally, and we'll tie back to a point just above or just so that the thread is just above the barb of the hook. Okay, so now the first thing that we're going to do is I've already pre-selected a marabou feather, so this is going to be our tail. Now basically from this point down is not usable feather, and I know it's a chartreuse feather, so it kind of picked up on the green screen behind me there with the logo, but that is about what we're going to use for the tail. Okay, so you can see I've stripped all this stuff off of the bottom, and then we're going to take this and we're going to fold it forward, and that's going to be our tail. So for our tail, I want to measure a distance about from the front of the hook eye to the point of the hook. I'm going to use my fingers to do that, so you can see I can start and I can roll this back and forth to get the length that I want. And that's about it right there. So I will change hands. Okay, and I'm just going to clip that stem off because I don't want that to get in the way. Okay, now at my tying point that I measure with my fingers, I'm going to put a medium wrap or a soft wrap, a medium wrap, and then a couple good hard wraps to get that tail on there. Okay, now what a lot of guys will do is they will take and clip this part of the feather off. I don't want to do that. I want to use that because I want to use it to bulk up the underbody of the fly. So I'm just going to take some loose spiral wraps up here, and I'm basically just lashing this feather down to the shank of the hook. And I want to get right about to my spot where I started. We want to leave this space up here. We don't really want to encroach on this because we want to keep that hook eye area clean. Now I can lift it up and clip it off. And now I want to lay some thread down on top of it just to make sure that that feather is lashed down good and tight onto the shank of the hook. Okay. Next material I'm going to grab is some, you can use smaller, this happens to be brassy chartreuse wire, and I'm just going to cut just a length of it off, about yay long. Don't have to get crazy about this, but I want enough to counter rib our hackle. I'm just going to tie this on, and I'm going to work it back to my tie-in point, which is right where I tied my tail. And then I'm going to work my way back forward. I'm just going to push this kind of out of the way. We're going to need that here in a minute. Okay, so now I've got my tail. You can see I've got my tail on. It's pointing out the back. I've used the front portion of the feather to kind of bulk up the underbody of our fly. And then I have tied a piece of wire that we're going to use for ribbing onto the shank as well. So next material is going to be Nature Spirit medium chenille. This happens to be chartreuse. We're actually going to do a black hackle on this fly, and I did that on purpose. Typically, if you're tying a chartreuse bugger or a white bugger, black bugger, they will all be the same color. But I wanted to use a very contrasting hackle color so that you can see how the hackle wraps. A lot of people don't realize when they see some of the flies what some of these materials are, and that little spiky thing that radiates around the outside of the hook, that's actually a feather that we're going to tie on and wrap around the shank of the hook. So I've peeled, just like we did with the green weenie, I've peeled a little bit of the fuzzy stuff away, so I've exposed the core, and I'm going to tie that in, put 3 good tight wraps on. Now I'm going to take this core, this section here, and I'm going to fold it back, and I'm going to wrap back right over top of it. And I'm going to follow this back to my tie-in point. Okay, I'm going to get back up to the front, and I'm going to throw a 1/2 hitch in. Now I'm going to hang my bobbin onto my cradle. Now, if you were using a contemporary standard vise, you would hand over hand wrap this material. So you would have to change hands each time that you did it. And that's kind of the technique that we've all learned. If you have a rotary vise or a vise like the Nor-vise that you can spin, a bit of a better technique we feel is to hold your material straight, and then you can just rotate the shank of your hook, and it gives you good consistent tension, and you can lay that body right on nice and smooth and work it right up to your tie-in point. Now remember, this section up here, we don't want to encroach in that. We want to leave that kind of bare because we don't want to have our materials bleeding over onto the to our eye of our hook. Okay, so I've got my body wrapped on. Now I'm going to come and I'm going to tie this off. Okay, do a couple wraps behind the material here. Then you advance the material rearward and you do a couple wraps in front, and that will lock it in. And now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to clip this off. Okay, so now we've got our tail, we've got our body, and now we've got to put on our hackle. So like I said, I'm going to choose a kind of an off-color hackle. And this fly will fish, the chartreuse and black combo. We will use and we will fish it, but this is more so that you guys can see what the hackle does and how it goes on to the shank of the hook. So this is your standard hackle feather, okay? And your feathers will have a shiny side, and then they will have a dull side to them. So the shiny side is typically the top of the feather, and the dull side is typically the bottom of the feather. So you will hear when you're in fly tying classes, you will hear tie your hackle shiny side forward or so what. Basically what they're doing is they're trying to show you the difference between the front and the back of the feather. Also, the feathers a lot of times will have kind of a natural curve to them, and if you have the shiny side facing the front of the fly or the eye of the hook, the curve will be back towards the rear, and that's usually what we want. Okay, so I've selected this hackle feather. Okay, I'm going to prep it by stripping off a bunch of this stuff off of the bottom because it's really no good. Okay, and there's a lot of different ways to tie a bugger. There's a lot of different ways to do your hackle. This is just one way. This is the way that I do it when I'm tying the buggers. I think it makes for a stronger fly, but there are tons and tons of different ways to do this. Okay, so got my hackle prepped. I want to clip this excess stem off of here. Okay, so I've just got a little bit of the stem exposed. This is the shiny side, this is the dull side. So I want the shiny side facing forward. Okay, I'm going to tie my hackle stem, I'm going to tie my hackle feather on right to the front of the fly. So I'm going to do 3 wraps behind. This is called figure 8 wrap. You got to be careful because you got feathers and wire and everything kind of hanging off of here right now. Do 2 wraps behind. And we'll do 1 more in the front and we'll throw a 1/2 hitch on it. Get that without getting any fibers trapped in there. I got a few, but that's okay. Okay, now with your conventional standard, if you have a static hook vise that you can't move the hook, you will take this hackle and you will wrap it. And I typically will do a couple of real close touching wraps on the front, and then we'll spiral it back as we start going over the body. Okay, if you're using a rotary vise, or in this case the Nor-vise that you can spin, we will hold the hackle still, and I can spin my vise, and I can lay that hackle on nice and neat. Okay, now that gives me the head. I've got about 2 1/2 good wraps there. So you want a little more hackle towards the front, and now I'll put a little more angle on it, and then we'll just do like a barber pole kind of spiral wrap on this until we get, and you want them to be even till we get to the back. The back would be our tie-in point. Okay, now this is where it gets a little tricky. I want to stop right here with my hackle on the top. Now I want to grab my wire and I'm going to cross the wire and the hackle feather. Okay, so now I've got the hackle trapped, and now I'm going to reverse or counter wrap my wire back up the body of the fly. So we wrap the hackle in one direction on the way back, and now we're wrapping the wire in the opposite direction on the way forward. And what that does is it crosses the wire over the stem of the feather. And this is where I believe that this technique makes for a much more durable fly. Okay, so now I've got my wire, and basically every wrap that I've made with the hackle, and this is why I did the 2 contrasting colors, every wrap that I did with the hackle has a crossing wrap in the opposite direction with the wire. And like I said, this makes for a very durable fly. So now I want to get some good tight wraps on this wire here right behind the eye of the hook. And I'll do 3 behind, 3 in front, and I'll repeat that twice. So I'll do 3 more behind, and I will do 3 more in front. Now I'm going to take, and usually with your wire, you can take, and if you just kind of work it back and forth, you can helicopter it off, and it will break right at your tie-in point. Okay, now I want to very carefully take all of these hackle fibers, and I want to pull them back. And I just want to expose the eye of the hook. Remember in the beginning when I said leave that little spot bare, that spot behind the eye of the hook, this is why we do that. Okay, so I've got all my hackle fibers pulled back. Now I can build a nice compact little thread head. I want your head to be roughly the size of the diameter of the hook. Okay, don't go too crazy. Now, remember our bodkin has this little dimple in the back, and I'm going to put a couple, 2 or 3 half hitches on it, and I actually pulled a little too much and broke my thread, and that's okay because that was on my second half hitch. Now, the last thing that we want to do is we're going to come in here and we have this end of our hackle feather. Now, I don't want to come in with my scissors and clip this because I don't want to cut any of these fibers off or any of the tail. So I want to leave my scissors open, and I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to kind of saw it back and forth, and that will cut my excess hackle out. Now, if you like, you can take a brush and you can brush this back. And there you have just your standard woolly bugger. Probably this fly has caught more fish than any other fly that that you will tie. This is definitely one that that you want to tie. Let's go ahead and switch cameras. Okay, so that was our standard woolly bugger. Okay, this chartreuse and black, it will fish for sure. This is actually one of my favorite color combos, but I did the black hackle so that you could see how the hackle and the body kind of interact when you're wrapping it. Again, this is another staple that should be in your trout box as well as your warm water box, smallmouth, largemouth, bleak like crazy. You can tie it. We've tied them as big as I've seen them in a one-aught that people have used for tarpon, believe it or not, down to micro buggers in like size 10 or so on a little jig hook, which is great for drifting under an indicator. So there you go. There's installment number 3 in our beginner to fly tire series, the woolly bugger. Thank you guys very much, and we'll see you next month.